Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms, and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector, and your host, Erica Adams. For as long as intelligent life has existed, or maybe even longer, so have those elusive enigmas we call dreams. I once read in a book that the mind is like a room, and the process of dreaming is the mind's way of cleaning or reorganizing this room, to look through our subconscious and reassess our thoughts and memories in a new light. Whether you believe this particular analogy has merit or not, there is no denying that dreams, and nightmares, are extremely powerful things, tools for inspiring us and teaching us about ourselves, and this film shows us a fine example of exactly that. Here is the story of Ink, released January 23, 2009, and recommended for viewers 16 and up. John Sullivan is a man whose purpose in life has become increasingly non-existent. His wife is dead, and his young daughter, Emma, is in the custody of her grandparents due to his grief-induced alcoholism and drug abuse. Now all he has left is his business job, selling bonds and keeping all the rich investors happy, even at the expense of what little compassion and sanity he has left. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him and everyone else on Earth, two great forces battle every night for the souls of mankind through the power of dreams. The storytellers, who give joy, hope, and strength through good dreams, and the incubi, whose nightmares fill the mind and heart with fear, pain, and despair. But the entire game changes when Ink, a disfigured creature covered in a robe of chains and black rags, appears. Despite the storyteller's best efforts to stop him, Ink kidnaps Emma's soul, putting her real body into a deadly coma. But even this tragedy isn't enough to take John away from his work, or make him face the grief of his past. Now storytellers Alel, Gabe, Sarah, Leave, and their blind eccentric ally, Jacob, must not only find a way to rescue Emma before Ink sacrifices her to the incubi, but help John find his humanity before it is consumed by darkness forever. If films like Napoleon Dynamite and the Blair Witch Project have taught us anything, it's that even with little money and resources, a bit of imagination and perseverance can go a long way in creating a high-quality movie, and Ink is no exception. Husband and wife duo Jamin and Kiowa Winans took on many roles in the creation of Ink. Besides both of them executive producing, Jamin was its director, writer, editor, and score composer, and Kiowa was its art director, costume designer, and sound designer. Now that is some serious skill and dedication. Still, they were unable to find a big studio to pitch the film, so they decided to pitch Ink directly through their own independent film company, Double Edge Films, and see to the theatrical and DVD distribution themselves. Word soon spread, as did the online piracy of the film. But the Winans couldn't have been happier, as it's given the film all the more unprecedented exposure to wider audiences, most of whom have praised it highly. The idea of sentient beings being responsible for humans' dreams isn't a new one, but this is the first time I've seen it presented in a way that's so, well, cool. This story takes place in 21st century America and has a very dark urban aesthetic. Likewise, instead of juxtaposing this with medieval wizards or demons or anything traditionally mythical, as is often the case in stories like this, both dream-giving races have also been designed to be contemporary in appearance and character. But this creative choice goes even further. According to the DVD commentary, in designing the storytellers and the incubi, the Winans used as inspiration a quote by Narnia author C.S. Lewis. "How monotonously alike all the great tyrants and conquerors have been. How gloriously different are the saints." The storytellers look and act like the kind of people you'd see on a college campus or in a coffee shop, or maybe even babysitting your own children. Young men and women of every ethnicity, attired in jeans, leather, shades, and piercings, smart and confident in their individuality, and yet as warm and comforting as their name. but the incubi are like a hospital patient's worst nightmare, no pun intended. Each covered in black smocks and gloves, smug but lifeless grins forever plastered on their bespectacled faces, which flicker in a painful monochrome behind a sheet of glass like a broken TV screen. Much like the demons whose name they share, they delight in the psychological raping of their victims, a weak heart cowering behind a facade of power. It's also worth noting that the dreams and nightmares shown throughout the film depict not the fantastic, like gaining superpowers or seeing monsters, but much more realistic or down-to-earth events. Now, before you start thinking how dull that sounds, let me ask this. If you were to experience a wonderful surprise, like reuniting with a lost loved one or winning the lottery, or a horrific tragedy like attempting suicide due to bullying or enduring a spouse's verbal abuse, would you truly feel any less emotionally or spiritually affected than by anything bizarre or impossible? The visual effects also give Ink a unique look that I've rarely seen in film. The lighting is unusually bright, almost blinding in daylight scenes, as though to blur the line between realities even further, and to remind us of how the protagonists may, or may not, be seeing what's right in front of them. And much of the editing, namely of the more distressing scenes, is reminiscent of that of the Saw films. Rapid cuts from one shot to another, often alternating between past and present events, combined with frantic fast-forwarding, all serve to emphasize the characters' chaotic desperation to escape their suffering. Even with all the supernatural elements, this is still a very realistic portrayal of self-destruction. John believes he must maintain perfection and an almost cutthroat detachment in order to feel safe and at ease, to pretend he no longer has a family in order to not feel the pain of that loss. Ink, likewise, desires nothing more than to become an incubus, free from emotion and immune to empathy so that he needn't ever face heartache again, a desire that fuels his paranoid rage while deepening the shame behind his appearance. In fact, Jacob, with his quirky, unruffled humor, illustrates this hellish trend in a literally and allegorically beautiful manner. Sporting a tattered hoodie and thick black X's taped over his eyes, an absolutely brilliant touch, by the way, Jacob is a pathfinder who is able, unlike other spirits, to physically affect the human world. It is not only due to his blindness that he constantly counts under his breath. He is listening for the rhythm that can only be made by an entire world, the sound to which everything in creation dances without even realizing it. He compares man's destruction to a chain reaction, a downward spiral, one that can be stopped only if and when one listens for the cues and moves accordingly. And the sequence in which Jacob conducts this music is accompanied by smooth notes and a gentle echoing beat, a seamless blend of the urban edginess of hip-hop and the spiritual comfort of New Age, like much of this film's masterful score. It is often circumstances beyond control, rather than any inherent evil, that drives one down the path of hostility and sorrow. But here we see that these feelings are what makes these supposed antagonists all the more human, the very part of themselves that they want to destroy, no matter how heinous the method or how steep the cost. Their greatest fear is the belief that all their misfortune is their own fault, and if that is so, how, they wonder, can they ever hope to be redeemed, when all they have ever received from the world is damnation? Whenever I can actually recall my dreams upon waking, it's rare that I have one I truly feel is trying to tell me something about myself, but I never stop trying to understand. If there's one story that shows how dreams are far more than just images in our brains, it is Ink. This cinematic labor of love is too visceral not to invoke heart-wrenched tears or long, hard thoughts on how depression and loss can turn even the best people into monsters, and how they can be healed by kindness and understanding. A true mirror to the soul, if ever there was one. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. I know for a fact that I'm not alone in this, but one of my favorite cartoons growing up was Wallace and Gromit. At least a dozen times when I was a kid, I'd ask my parents if we could go down the block to the video store to rent one, if not all, of the short films on VHS, my personal favorite being A Close Shave, the sheep, especially Sean, being as funny as they are adorable. And I swear to this day, my dad gets completely cracked up by the scene in A Grand Day Out, when the title duo blast off in their homemade rocket from their basement, and the crowd of mice whip out their sunglasses to wear as they watch. And as an added bonus, Dad still likes to poke just the tiniest bit of fun at me as Wallace and I are both, as the lovable protagonist himself would put it, just crackers about cheese. Seriously though, I do love me a good slice of cheese. But I digress. As Aardman Animation, the studio behind Wallace and Gromit, began putting out more top-quality claymation works and even movies over the years, like Chicken Run, The Pirates Band of Misfits, and of course, Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, I decided I wanted to see what some of their older stuff was like. What I found didn't disappoint. One of their first franchise characters is still alive and well after 40 years, and not just on the other side of the pond. Please allow me to present Morph, making his debut February 15th, 1977, and suitable for viewers of all ages. Residing in a large art studio in the heart of England, Morph is a living figure of Tuscan red clay who sleeps in a pencil box and, just as his name implies, is able to transform into various creatures and objects, often with quirky results. With a curiosity and mischievous streak belied by his 4-inch stature, Morph is always on the hunt for fun, the more than occasional cake, and a good old-fashioned prank with, or on, his even more mischievous and more hungry white-colored partner in crime, Chaz. Joined by his other friends, both the humans who stop in at the studio and the other handcrafted residents who live underneath the table, every day means the start of a new adventure for the amazing Morph. That Morph has been in so many British TV shows over the years is a testament to his popularity. He first appeared alongside BBC children's TV host Tony Hart in his 2 art programs Take Heart and Heartbeat from the late 70s to the early 90s. From 1980 to 81, Morph starred in a spin-off show of his own, The Amazing Adventures of Morph, with Hart narrating and sometimes participating in the shenanigans of Morph and his friends. He got yet another spin-off in 1996, The Morph Files, narrated by English actor Neil Morrissey and featuring a mix of new animation and storylines with footage from Amazing Adventures in order to create new stories, which now center partly on Morph and Chaz's interactions and hijinks with their new human-sized computer. He even made a guest appearance, a rather creepy one, in the second third-season episode of the sci-fi police procedural drama series Ashes to Ashes in 2009. And then, after a highly successful Kickstarter campaign in October 2013, Aardman co-founder Peter Lord has led production on brand new Morph shorts to be uploaded to Morph's official YouTube channel. Since then, Morph's earlier series and shorts have also been uploaded for audiences around the world to enjoy. Since its founding in 1972, Aardman's specialty has been the ability to create characters so expressive that no words are needed to understand them. Morph is the result of this talent turned into both a work of art and comedy gold. Morph and the other characters do speak, but in a sort of high-pitched gobbledygook. To achieve this, the animation is played at half speed while the voice actor records in his normal voice. Then both the video and the vocals are sped up to twice normal speed, achieving the characters' signature chipmunk voices. Here, the words sound mostly like ridiculously cute baby talk, while the intentions are portrayed through tone, expressions, actions, and body language. But every so often, it is somewhat possible to make out a semi-coherent sentence, such as when Morph, about to draw a picture of himself, proudly declares to the audience something very much like, "I'm gonna make a self-portrait of me," or when Chaz, about to fix a washing machine for Morph, announces, "Never fear, Chaz is here." Also noteworthy is the way each character's voice is just different enough to demonstrate their distinct personality. Morph has a smoother voice, being the more sensible one, though I use that term fairly loosely, while Chaz's voice is rougher and more gravelly, as befitting a natural-born delinquent. And Morph's other friends are also instantly recognizable and funny in their own right. There's Grand Morph, Morph's bearded, googly-eyed grandfather, an inventor who likes to travel by skateboard. Delilah, a bossy and easily annoyed female with large glasses and a yellow dress. Folly, a bead-eyed tinfoil girl who is kind, if somewhat ditzy. Gillespie, large and slow-witted, but gentle and patient. Nailbrush, Morph's dog-like pet that also just happens to be a literal nailbrush. The Very Small Creatures, a collective group of small colored plasticine balls that always travels together, with Little Green, the smallest of all, often trying extra hard just to keep up. Poor thing. And briefly touching back on the subject of gobbledygook, the last character on our cast list is actually named Gobbledygook, a little green alien child with bright red eyes, a large appetite, and a language that even the others can't understand. And believe me, that's saying something. From a storytelling perspective, while narration isn't necessary in a typical Morph short, the choices made in The Amazing Adventures of Morph and the Morph Files regarding not only narration, but also context and editing, make such a striking difference in the viewing experience, even with the footage being exactly the same in each series. In Amazing Adventures, Tony Hard appears on screen in each 4 to 5 minute episode, reading aloud from the book that chronicles Morph's exploits, hence the series name, and often translating into intelligible words what each character is saying. At the same time, Hard acts as a sort of parental figure to them, praising them, scolding them, and otherwise interacting with them directly. We never actually see him talking on screen, but sometimes he, or at least his hands, and any of the claymation characters will be in the same shot together. Note the subtle change in frame rate of Hart's movements in these shots, namely how it flows a lot less smoothly due to the stop motion. In the Morph Files, Neil Morrissey is never on screen and says just enough to keep the story going, often in the form of jokes or other humorous remarks. And the scenes of Morph and Chaz with their computer, the screen images being 2D animated, are interspersed in between footage from Amazing Adventures and other shorts in a given 9 to 10 minute episode, tying them all together in a single narrative. Consider the episodes, The Babysitters and Babysitting, respectively, which both involve the gang trying to get a crying baby to sleep. In the former, Hart begins by stating that the problem arose when Folly failed to tell everyone that she was babysitting, and now they all have to band together in order to stop the noise. In the latter, Morrissey frames the episode as being about Morph trying to get peace and quiet so that he can relax, and the baby screaming is yet another hindrance that he has to address in extravagant fashion. I must say, though, that the combination of multiple shorts in the Morph Files can be a bit jarring. Because they were all made at separate stages and times, the differences in the age and quality of the animation is glaringly obvious. But this is a minor nitpick in my opinion. In fact, it is cool to see through each series just how much Morph has evolved over time, much like the art of claymation. What's more, half the fun comes from watching all the humorous ways the various art supplies and knickknacks in the studio are utilized, especially the ones that are small to humans but large to Morph. From disguising himself as a pencil among pencils during a game of hide-and-seek, to using an electric fan's wind to fly a kite. As traditional as life-size bananas in Morph's garden, or as modern as he and Chaz running and dancing to the rhythmic scratches of a turntable's records. Because Morph's designs, characters, and settings are so simple, nothing in a given plot ever feels dated or out of place, allowing for a boundless array of scenarios, limited only by one's imagination. Like many good shows aimed at children, Morph's greatest strength lies in its approachability. Episodes are short and not complex, with amusing and creative little stories that provide a quick but genuine and satisfying laugh. Whether narrated or not, The actions of the characters are what tell the stories, with their words being a bonus to the charming aesthetic rather than a language barrier. And with non-English speaking audiences able to get in on the fun as well, here is a series that literally anybody in the world, and their inner children, can smile at. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. As it turned out, my search for a buyable copy of this older children's novel back in the early 2000s was just as memorable as the novel itself. My first attempt led me a few miles away to where a man was selling vast amounts of books from his huge stately house. He didn't have the book I was looking for, but that didn't make wandering and exploring the rooms of his beautiful home-turned-bookstore any less cool or exciting. It was the first and last time I went, and once in a while I find myself wishing I had taken advantage of the opportunity more. In any case, the other first this book provided was that it gave me a reason to seriously consider internet shopping. With the help of my parents, it was then that I created my Amazon account and from there, made my very first online purchase. In retrospect, I don't feel that the way these adventures made my owning and reading of this book all the more enriching is too unlike the life journey of Don Kushner's protagonist, namely, a book dragon. First published in 1987 and recommended for readers 8 and up. One of the last surviving dragons of the Middle Ages, Nonsuch takes the ways of his kind very seriously, just as his stern but loving grandmother raised him to do. However, she makes it very clear to him that he will never be a true and proper dragon unless he finds himself a treasure to guard. When his grandmother at last leaves him, and after inadvertently gaining the strange ability to alter his size according to his food intake, Nonsuch sets off in search of his own personal treasure. And find it he does, in the form of a beautiful illuminated manuscript, lovingly crafted by a wise and devoted monk. But then, a theft gone awry traps the now insect-sized dragon within the pages of his book for 600 years, at which time both he and it are transported to a small East Coast bookshop in the 1990s. Hiding within the nooks and crannies of the bookshelves, Nonsuch never reveals himself to the humans of this new place and time. But in spite of himself, he does take an instant liking to the shop's kindly owner, Mr. Gottlieb, especially upon seeing the care and respect with which the man treats the dragon's treasure. And so, when the sleazy and conniving real estate agent, Mr. Abercrombie, threatens the future of the shop, Nonsuch takes it upon himself to also protect Mr. Gottlieb, his loved ones, and all of his beloved books, the way that only a dragon can. The overall tone of this book strikes me as very pleasant and introspective. While I'm not sure that traditional story labels like coming of age or self-discovery would quite effectively describe this, I think it still may prompt readers to reflect on how their past experiences have shaped who they become. One of the more amusing aspects of this story is that many of the animal characters, especially Nonesuch's grandmother, remark, or in some cases rant, on other creatures or life in general almost the same way that many people do today regarding dysfunctional family members or politics. Like many a no-nonsense matriarch, the grandmother is the type who believes that she knows what's what about the world, and woe betide the one who dares suggest otherwise. And yet I could never bring myself to dislike her. Though she often talks like a grouchy old bat, we see through Nonesuch that she is indeed very knowledgeable and only wants to bring her grandson up right. Plus, her curt words actually make a lot of sense more often than not. Pages 4 through 6. And then her mind, which sometimes could not remember events of the same day, took a great leap backwards. In the beginning, his grandmother told Nonesuch, dragons had chosen to separate themselves from the dinosaurs, to whom they were distantly related, except for being so much more intelligent. They were so stupid, the grandmother said, wagging her head with a sour, disapproving tone, as if she were speaking of creatures alive now, not those dead for millions of years. No true dragon could ever tolerate such stupidity. But grandmother, Nonesuch said respectfully, for he knew she didn't like to be contradicted. Some of our ancestors have done foolish things. You've said so yourself. He remembered her past stories. Most of the time, he added. His grandmother reared back her head and almost rose up on her legs. Her dim eyes glowed fiercely. Foolish? Yes. Improvident? More often than not. Never counted the cost. At times, frankly, insane, but not stupid. Any true dragon could always tally up the cost of its actions, could always foretell if it was heading for disaster if it chose. But there are more important choices. Then, her eyes sending out pulses of dull light, as pride and sorrow swelled within her, his grandmother told of the valiant and fortunate Shatswak, who, from high above the Caucasus Mountains, spotted a vein of pure gold exposed by a sudden geological fault. Obedient to the great law of all dragons, guard your treasure, Shatswak settled down on the shining surface, covering it with his wide wings and long tail, hardly leaving it even to search for food. Finally, when he was so weak that he could no longer fly, he was set upon by scores of knights with two-handed swords and hundreds of bushy-bearded peasants with long axes. He gave a good account of himself before his enemies hacked him to pieces, and his green blood mingled with theirs. But the dragon's blood burned down into the gold itself, giving it a magnificent blue-green sheen, the dragon gold from which the crowns of all the Tsars of Russia were fashioned. Yes, guard your treasure, the grandmother repeated. A dragon without a treasure is nothing but an ugly flying reptile, with even less dignity than a salamander. Then, her nostrils pinched together, she added, with less dignity than a turtle, and with no more than a toad. Nonesuch's grandmother had many sayings like this, which she brought out at more or less appropriate times. Never kill anything you won't eat, she would say, adding in a milder tone, why waste the energy? Or, be dauntless, valiant, tragic, whatever you like, but don't be stupid. Or, if you must fight, find a worthy foe, often adding with a shake of the head, if you're lucky enough to come across one these days. But usually, even if she had said it before, she would end her list of precepts with, always guard your treasure. Nonesuch, for his part, takes life in stride, possessing a healthy curiosity but without ever forgetting his roots. Though determined to follow his nature as well as his grandmother's words, he does so in his own way, going so far as to shrink himself to the size of smaller creatures. While a logical series of events leads to him discovering this ability, how he actually acquires it is only hinted at and never fully explained. Nevertheless, it grants Nonesuch a view of life that he has never seen before. This is doubly true regarding humans and their creation of books. It is not only the joy of the written word where Kushner draws our attention. Through Nonesuch's eyes, young readers get a glimpse of the beauty of illuminated manuscripts, on each page of which both words and pictures are painstakingly crafted to create a divine masterpiece of color and detail, almost as real as the real thing. Page 69. But the images on the top page in the binder and on the unfinished page drew Nonesuch's attention more closely. The middle part of each page was covered with black letters. In the wide margins around the text were more familiar shapes. A vine started in the lower right-hand corner and spread all around the page, its branches meeting again at the upper left-hand corner. Small tendrils of the vine ran right into the text, marking certain letters with tiny red and gold flowers. Away from the text, the vine became alive with larger flowers in fantastic shapes and colors. Here and there, faces peered out of the vine. Unicorns, gnomes, mischievous monkeys, solemn toads. From one leaf, a tiny bat hung, head down. In the blank spaces away from the vine, bright butterflies fluttered, looking as if in a moment they would fly away from the pages. Adding to the aesthetic, pictures of a similar nature are peppered throughout the novel, some larger ones bordering the pages that begin each chapter, while smaller ones are placed above or in between some of the paragraphs. One of my favorites is the Robin Hood figure on the inside of page 18, shooting an arrow toward the upper left-hand corner into the corresponding number, which flies backward in pieces. On that note, one thing in particular that struck me is how easy it was for me to forget that this is a book aimed at children because of its surprisingly quiet atmosphere. Though there are some lightly amusing bits certainly, like the almost casual manner in which the narrator chronicles Nonesuch's attacks on cats and dogs that mistake him for prey, or when the grandmother matter-of-factly describes rearranging the chemistry of the stars in the sky as if it were comparable to clearing off a kitchen table, or, without giving away any spoilers, the oddly practical way in which Nonesuch finally gets rid of Abercrombie. But I think this aforementioned atmosphere boils down to the main character's pragmatism. There were some points when I found myself thinking of the movie Forrest Gump. A weird comparison, I know, but please hear me out. Like Gump, during his entrapment within his manuscript, Nonesuch often finds himself in the midst of prominent events in history, such as the Black Death, the Great Fire of London, and the War of the Roses. Such events most remember and revere, while the more down-to-earth character may acknowledge it, but then move on with no real attachment or emotion. But that's not to say that Nonesuch doesn't feel nostalgic every now and then. The dragons of this story have neither true love nor hate for humans, generally preferring to avoid them altogether, unless of course they present themselves as a convenient meal. Nonesuch is no noble defender trying to justify the whims of humans in spite of their evil ways. He reminisces and wonders a bit when presented with the somewhat existential question of why he chooses to live among the humans in the bookshop. But in the end, rather than dwell on it, he satisfies himself by deciding that it makes him happy, a simple and sensible answer that best suits his nature and his personal interests. Pages 172 to 73. In the following days, Nonesuch hardly left the bookshop. This was not only on account of his own special treasure, the Book of Hours. From time to time he crawled into the cupboard in Mr. Gottlieb's study to look at it, for the bookseller was too worried to take it out. But mostly, Nonesuch realized, he spent his time watching over the other books in the shop. Why was he so concerned with these books? They didn't even stay in the shop. They were sold, people took them away, often with eager faces, and sometimes brought others to take their place. It was like the old days in the Abbey of Oddfields, he finally realized, when he had set himself to guard the crops which, he knew, would be harvested and eaten and replaced with fresh plantings. These books were the crops of the bookshop, Nonesuch thought. Curiously, this idea pleased him. My friends have good crops, he said to himself. Friends! How he had come to be involved in the ways of humans. Sometimes he wondered if his grandmother would approve. Then he thought, this must be an aspect of human life that even she had never known. If we must be involved with humans, he told her in his mind, these are the kind of humans we should choose. Besides providing a unique take on the concept of a dragon guarding a valuable treasure from thieves or invaders, a book dragon also highlights the beauty of books, their creation as well as their use, both ancient and modern, without being obvious or preachy about it, and encouraging readers to enjoy and share the activity for its own sake. This is the kind of novel that's best read in the evening, in a big comfy recliner, with a nice cup of tea or hot chocolate on hand. Something to make you think about your past fondly, and use those memories to move forward, but at your own relaxed pace. However, you may want to consider leaving the book out when you're done for the night. There might be another bookworm nearby, hiding just out of sight, wanting to take a peek too. You never know. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. I discovered Owl City on my car radio in the UMD parking lot. About a year or so later, I discovered this music project at UMD as well, this time while I was at a vending table in the hallway outside the bookstore, selling copies of The Roaring Muse, the official magazine of UMD's Literary Guild. Many of the other vendors advertising their own respective clubs, charities, and causes would often play music on their laptops, presumably to alleviate the boredom, or, more likely, to grab people's attention, like mine for instance. On the other side of one of the pillars that stood behind my table, another table was playing the chorus of a song that I was unfamiliar with. Truth be told, it did sound a little annoying at first, being mixed with the hustle and bustle of students and teachers and all the other noises of the campus. Even so, the series of notes rhythmically punctuating the air in a sort of high-pitched staccato was too intriguing to ignore. I decided to take a quick break from my own vending duties to go to the table and ask the boy there about the song's title and its artist, which he very kindly provided. As soon as I got home, I was able to listen to the song properly. And I have to say, in retrospect, college couldn't have been a more appropriate time or place to hear this music for the first time, except for high school maybe. Without further ado, let me present M83, performing from 2001 to the present, and recommended for listeners 16 and up. Though originally a duo featuring Nicolas Fromageau, today M83's sole official member is its creator, Anthony Gonzalez, a vocalist, songwriter, and record producer from Antibes, France. After an injury at the age of 14 left him unable to play football, an interest that he shared with his family, his parents bought him a guitar, encouraging him to develop a keen interest in music. He would go on to form the project M83 with Fromageau 3 years later, though the latter would ultimately leave it in 2009 in order to pursue his own music career. The band is named after Messier 83, one of the sky's closest and brightest spiral galaxies, so close in fact that it is fully capable of being seen with binoculars. Located approximately 15 million light-years away from Earth in the constellation Hydra, it is also known in the New General Catalog of Nebulae and Clusters of Stars as NGC 5236, as well as the Southern Pinwheel Galaxy, due to its resemblance to the Pinwheel Galaxy found in the constellation Ursa Major, aka the Great Bear. And now that I've thoroughly bored you all with that random astronomy lesson, back to the music. Inspired by such bands as My Bloody Valentine, Pink Floyd, and Tangerine Dream, M83's electronic sound is laced with a distinct 1980s vibe, a combination of contemporary pop and the dream pop of the same decade. The aforementioned song, Midnight City, has been featured not only in a variety of shows, films, and commercials, both in Europe and North America, but even in the 2012 UEFA European Championship and the London 2012 Olympic Games. Moreover, North American listeners will likely recognize M83's songs from many films of the early 2010s, including, but not limited to, the entire soundtrack of Oblivion, I Need You in Divergent, Wait in The Fault in Our Stars, and Another Way From You and outro in the remake of The Gambler. Having first heard Midnight City and its corresponding album, Hurry Up We're Dreaming, the 6th, and from there, its 5th, Saturdays Equal Youth, and its 7th, Junk, I had initially become much more familiar with M83's later music, ranging from 2008 to 2016 as of the time I write this. But as I listened to the first 4 albums, ranging from 2001 to 2007, I began to notice an increasingly apparent change in style. Starting with Saturdays, from a lyrical and rhythmic standpoint, the songs feel very developed and structured. In contrast, Gonzalez's earlier pieces sound more like experimental demos. From backdrops of random voices or other sound effects, to a lack of precise musical arrangement or direction, this era of M83 is marked by a more definitive ambience. Ambiguous, spontaneous, intuitive. Now, I don't know if Gonzalez intended this, and I might be reading too much into it, but this change in style could reflect a process of personal reflection and maturation through music. More to the point, I think the aesthetic and thematic approach of M83 as a whole can be summed up with one word: teenager. Dreams, freedom, love, loneliness, melancholy, nostalgia. Gonzalez touches upon many of the feelings young people long to understand and the questions they long to answer, with songs that masterfully illustrate the nature of youthful rebellion and imagination. To begin with, the band's distinct vocal style involves lyrics often being sung in a deliberately soft and whispery voice on top of much louder instruments, a figurative expression of a restless artistic soul trying to find meaning in that ugly, beautiful chaos we call life, in ways neither right nor wrong. One may remember and lament a past life now gone, on Sunday night 1987, chase life in order to unearth its secrets, declaring, "We own the sky," struggle through the pain and confusion it inflicts in the aptly named Teen Angst, or hit it head-on in a spiritual blaze of glory like the daredevil narrator of Steve McQueen. I realize how pretentious all this might sound, my own lofty words not helping, I'm sure, but I prefer to think of it as poetic. As I listen to this, I often imagine kids sitting cross-legged on their beds or under trees, writing stories or other deeply personal thoughts in their notebooks, just as I did a lot during my high school years. One of the more unique features of M83's songs is the inclusion of brief monologues by younger narrators in between choruses. These can range from childish and whimsical to introspective and poignant. In the track whose French title roughly translates to "Tell Me a Story," a child imagines how much more fun life would be if we all turned into frogs and became, quote, "the biggest group of friends the world has ever seen, jumping and laughing forever." And the eponymous graveyard girl feels more at home in the darkness than she ever could in the sunlight. The cemetery her sanctuary, the wise and silent stones her true teachers. There is one other intriguing feature that aids this trend. Not counting instrumental pieces, very, very few songs ever drop their respective titles. These can be comprised of short single couplets, like You Appearing, or they can be full anthems, like Intro. Regardless, this lack of direct referencing between a song and its title adds a new layer of depth and mystery to their meanings, just as any good poem does. It also invites us to ponder the spirit and mindset of the writer, like how we may ponder the universe and what our place in it will ultimately become. As I'm sure many will testify, myself included, the teen years comprise arguably one of the most turbulent points in a person's life, a time when we wonder whether to leave behind all that has brought us unadulterated joy while agonizing how to face the inevitability of our future. On the other hand, it's also a time to embrace the world through self-reflection and realizing our full potential. As nostalgically retro as it is contemporarily visceral, M83 is Gonzalez's sonic love letter to that immortal era and all that it stands for. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. As I was coming into one of my college classes one morning in the spring of 2012, my eye caught the picture of a hardcover book belonging to a classmate. I figured it was a read for fun, as it wasn't one of our required texts, nor did it look particularly frightening, the class in question being Tales of Terror. Upon my asking, she told me a bit about it and allowed me to study it for a moment. Judging from its premise, as well as its insanely creative illustrations, it seemed right up my alley. When I found the book again later at Barnes & Noble, I opened it to a section that I had missed the first time. There, written on the pages that greeted me, was a single 4-word sentence, a sinister-sounding one despite my not understanding its context. Its font may be half the size of that of the main text, covering the entirety of pages 148 and 149 in 5 perfect rows and 5 perfect columns each. The sentence? You've just been poisoned. Reactionary thought number 1. Tales of Terror. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? We're reading Salem's Lot, not The Shining, but still. Reactionary thought number 2. Oh yeah, this is gonna be good. I know, I'm weird, but then, I am a writer. I present to you now Walter Moore's The City of Dreaming Books, first published in 2004 and recommended for readers 17 and up. Our story begins on the continent of Zamonia, Lancelot Wordwright, sadly, on his deathbed, his loyal godson and student, Optimus Yarnspinner, at his side. During his final moments of life, he tells Optimus the story of a budding anonymous author who had sent him an unpublished manuscript for him to read long ago. This manuscript, Lancelot claims, is undoubtedly the finest, most perfect piece of writing ever to be put to paper, the work of a bona fide literary genius. Bequeathing this priceless document to Optimus, Lancelot begs him with his dying breath to seek out the writer where he had sent him. Bookhome, where every facet of everyday life is related, established, or dominated solely by books and the written word. But as wondrous and enticing as this place is to the unquenchable imagination of Optimus, it also possesses many dark secrets, a fact he learns too late upon showing his manuscript to the wrong person. Now trapped within the catacombs of Bookhome, Optimus's quest and life are put in jeopardy as he must survive the fearsome booklings, murderous book hunters, ingeniously deadly book traps, and the mutant monsters that lurk within Bookhome's underbelly. But even these dangers seem trivial when Optimus is confronted by the legendary being known only as the Shadow King. Though technically the 4th book in Walter Moore's Zamonia series, this is the first in a self-contained sub-series, which luckily doesn't require reading of any prior novels. As of early 2018, only this book and its sequel, The Labyrinth of Dreaming Books, have been released and translated from their original German into English. The 3rd, The Castle of Dreaming Books, is still unreleased, but I very much look forward to seeing what happens after that particularly tantalizing cliffhanger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Even if I wasn't already taken in by the idea of a literal paradise for book lovers, I'd still be thoroughly impressed by Moore's world-building skills alone. For example, according to the translator's postscript, Morse first translated this book, rather painstakingly he claims, into German from the Zamonian writing of Optimus himself. I adore touches like this because such a connection between an artist and his creation, or an affiliation between one artist and another, as it were, makes even a world as bizarre as this feel more tangible and real. And naturally, no world is complete without its exotic locales and fascinating inhabitants. Through his illustrations, Morse shows us his gift for conjuring up such alien but imaginative creatures. From the 3-brained nocturnamats, the prophetic hags called uglies, and the disgustingly obese multi-armed shark grubs, to the fox-like vulpeds, the pig-like hoglings, and of course, the race to which Optimus belongs, the reptilian lindworms. Speaking of, all this we come to know through the eyes and voice of our narrating protagonist. Often addressing the audience directly as "dear readers," Optimus serves as our guide through this strange place as he recounts his story. At the same time, he represents us as well, reflecting our curiosity, fear, and captivation as we all experience these adventures for the first time along with him. His initial impressions of Bookholm and its literary wonders, for instance, being described with an almost childlike reverence. Plus, let's be honest, who among us bookworms hasn't salivated with breathless delight over the prospect of hundreds upon thousands of books, all ours for the reading, our greatest dilemma being which one to choose first? So many titles, so little time. Not unlike real life. Pages 32 to 33. There they were, the dreaming books. That was what the inhabitants of the city called antiquarian books because, from the dealer's point of view, they were neither truly alive nor truly dead, but located in an intermediate limbo akin to sleep. With their existence proper behind them and the prospect of decay ahead, millions upon millions of them slumbered in the bookcases, cellars and catacombs of Bookholm. Only when one of them was picked up and opened by an eager hand, only when it was purchased and borne off, could it awaken to new life. And that was what all these books dreamed of. Skipping to pages 40 through 41. On and on I roamed, and I'm bound to confess that my powers of recall are overtaxed by all the marvels that met my eyes. I felt as if I were walking through the pages of a lavishly illustrated book in which each flash of artistic inspiration was surpassed by the next. Walking letters advertising modern printing presses, murals portraying characters from popular novels, antiquarian bookshops whose old tomes literally overflowed into the street, multifarious life forms rummaging in bookcases and vying for their contents, huge Midgard serpents hauling wagons full of second-hand rubbish driven by uncouth turnip heads who pelted the crowd with trashy old volumes. In this city, one was forever having to duck to avoid being hit by a book. The hubbub was such that I caught only snatches of what was being said, but every conversation seemed to revolve around books in one way or another.
I wouldn't read a book by an ugly if you paid me.
He's giving a reading at the Guild Edge Book Emporium at timber time tonight. A first edition of Aurora Janice's second novel, the one with the typos in the foreword, for only 3 pyras. If anyone possessed the orm, it was Alicia Wimperslake. Typographically speaking, a disgrace to the entire printing industry. Someone ought to write a footnote novel, just footnotes of footnotes. That would be the thing. At last I paused at an intersection. Turning on the spot, I counted the bookshops in the streets running off it. There were no less than 61 of them. My heart beat wildly. Here, life and literature seemed to be identical. Everything centered on the written word. This was my city, my new home. Among my favorite aspects of this book is some of the most whimsically inventive wordplay I've ever seen, especially with regards to this universe's authors. Many of the names Optimus and the readers come across are actually anagrams of famous real-life authors. The results are as funny as they are outlandish. Just to name a few, Lewis Carroll is now Selwyn Rollcar, William Shakespeare is now Alicia Wimperslake, Charles Dickens is now Asdrell Chickens, John Keats is now Hanj Steak, and here's a keeper. Leo Tolstoy is now Elo Snooty. I bet Morse just had a ball making those up. On a more character-driven note, and for obvious reasons, I also love the last names of the book-obsessed Lindworms. Yarn Spinner, Wordwrite, Verse Wetter, etc. The Lindworms spend their lives cultivating their passion for literature and developing their writing skills in the hopes of becoming masterful storytellers. Thus, it is in Optimus's very blood to become a published author. But for all his bibliophilic ambition, he is essentially a dinosaurian Bilbo Baggins, very much the adventures make one late for dinner type. He accepts his godfather's will out of love for family and fine writing, but would prefer to read about a great escapade rather than be in the middle of one. He strives to be sensible and dignified in the increasingly barbaric and insane world he's found himself in, only to come off as either a near-hysterical coward or a pompous dork. This, however, is key to what initially keeps him from realizing his dream, as well as what I think makes him particularly relatable to any aspiring writers. Like most, Optimus has his own tastes and beliefs regarding what makes good literature, but many of the creatures he meets provide him with a treasure trove of new words, ideas, and writing styles that he never dreamed existed. Moreover, they tell him of the Orm, said to inspire authors to write books so eloquent and so superb that to read them is nothing short of paradise, and which Optimus is quick to reject as superstitious crap. I can't help but see Optimus's views of the Orm as a subtle jab at the well-meaning but close-minded artists whose abilities are undermined simply because they refuse to learn from the masters who came before them, or at least to try anything new and expand their horizons, a revelation that Optimus finds most humbling upon entering the library of the Orm. Page 404. I strolled along the shelves with my head on one side, checking the titles. The Cloud Cuckoo by Bronzar Morello, Recollections of the Day After Tomorrow by Arlon Dumpsey, A Pig in My Poke by Nestroket Krumpf. Never heard of them, neither the books nor their authors. Were these supposed to be literary gems? Little Enemies by Minimus Summonim, A Cure for the Incurable by Welgo Tark, Warts on a Toad's Neck by Horam Quackenbush, Nasal Hairs by Hazel Nares. And those were the books on the top shelf. I'd never read any of them. They were the sort of books I usually glanced at in a bookshop and then forgot forever. Soft Teeth by Carius Molar, The Joys of Gardening by... What? I came to a halt and automatically removed a book for the first time. It was Dancelot's masterpiece, cheek by jowl with all this worthless trash. I waited in my pause for a while. Then the blood rushed to my head. Yes, dear readers, I felt ashamed because I had behaved as ignorantly as all the stupid fools who had spurned Dancelot's book. What made me so sure that Arlon Dumpsey's Recollections of the Day After Tomorrow was of no interest, or Warts on a Toad's Neck? Had I ever given those books a fair crack of the whip? Perhaps I had just ignored them for the umpteenth time for reasons I myself couldn't have explained. Shame on me. I had to make amends. Taking Warts on a Toad's Neck from the shelf, I sat down and began to read it. Similarly to novels like Harry Potter, at least 98% of the story takes place in one location. But that one location is so rich, so enlivened through its bizarre details, eye-popping visuals, and whatever other surprises occupy it that it always feels new and exciting no matter how often you visit or how much you explore. But honestly, I cannot do this story justice with my words alone, not without massive spoilers anyway. Anyone in love with a good book won't be spellbound by Optimus's tale just because of zany creatures and clever book puns. This tale is for you, dear readers, who wonder why you are so spellbound by your favorite books and who strive to find the very best ones whose words bring laughter and tears, terror and peace, questions and answers, or otherwise make you feel, deep in your heart, as if your life will never be the same again. I am curious, do you prefer reading such words or writing them down? Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. I swear, to this day, the irony of where I learned of this movie makes me smile. Years ago, I was a student in the vet technology program at the Duluth Business University. During a break in between attending to the resident dogs and cats one evening, I was browsing through some random YouTube videos, mainly ones involving cartoon characters transforming into animals or vice versa, just because I felt like it. At one point, I came upon a 50-second clip from a fairly old-looking anime film. It depicted a little human girl changing into a cat, or rather, a cat person, with an older human boy falling backwards in horror at the spectacle. After the girl marvels at her new form, she laughs at the boy as she points out the same thing is happening to him. Sure enough, he too develops feline features before promptly passing out from the shock. I watched with a mixture of fascination and bemusement as the clip ended with two adult cat-like figures looking on as the cat girl prances with glee on all fours while the cat boy lay on his back, completely out cold. The $70 price tag on Amazon was a strong indicator of how rare this film is. Back then, I had nothing but that one clip and a few reviews to go on when deciding whether or not to buy it. But in the end, it was a gamble that paid off wonderfully. Prepare to get Catnapped, released June 10th, 1995, and recommended for viewers 7 and up. The family dog, Papa Doll, has been missing for days and days, but the reactions of his two young owners couldn't be more different. The hyper and overly imaginative Miko is beside herself, thinking he was abducted by aliens, while her cold and ill-tempered older brother, Torias, couldn't care less. In reality, however, Papa Doll isn't even in the children's dimension anymore. This is revealed by 3 feline scientists: the cantankerous Henoji, the easygoing Sudaboke, and the enthusiastic Hoi Hoi, who whisked the siblings away to Bonapal Wit, a world inhabited by anthropomorphic cats capable of working powerful magic. There, Torias and Miko learn that Papa Doll was brought there by Dodo, the demented servant of the tyrannical Princess Bubarina, who terrorizes her subjects with her Midas-like ability to turn anyone and anything she touches into a balloon. Moreover, having been overexposed to the supernatural light of this world's sun, Papa Doll has now mutated into a giant rampaging monster, who Bubarina intends to use in her ultimate plan to solidify her rule over Bonapal Wit forever. And if that's not enough, the sunlight has now transformed the 2 human children into cats themselves, and should the sun shine on them for more than a day, they will become monsters as well, a dilemma made all the more serious when Miko is taken hostage and imprisoned in Bubarina's palace. And so, at the behest of the scientific trio, Master Sandata, the good wizard, and the tomboyish fighter Choo-Choo, Torias must change his selfish ways and pluck up his courage in order to rescue his sister, break the spell upon his dog, and thwart Bubarina's plot before the next sunrise. As I'm sure you've gathered, this is one bizarre movie, even by anime standards. In fact, one reason I initially hesitated to buy it was because its writer and director, Takashi Nakamura, was also an animation director for the famed 1988 cyberpunk anime film, Akira. At the time, that was a bit too much for me in the disturbing and gross body horror department. However, had I given in to that fear, I wouldn't be talking about this movie now. To make a more apt comparison, in terms of character design, I often find myself reminded of another anime cat film, The Cat Returns. The felines in that story, though they speak and think like humans, are made to look and feel natural, retaining the physiology of ordinary cats. The ones in Catnapped, on the other hand, are humanoid in a more literal sense, from the elaborate clothes and hairstyles to their paws functioning more like hands with claws. Seriously, just take a human face, stick a pair of cat ears and a nose on it, and voila! But what really rounds out the outlandishness is the primary setting, Bonapal Wit. The term eye candy is brought to a whole new level here, an almost psychedelic blend of buttery yellows, bubblegum pinks, dreamsicle oranges, and rich blueberry indigos. What's more, the place looks like a playpen, a carnival, and a toy store all rolled into one. The building block landscape, the clockwork machines, there's even one responsible for shooting the sun into the sky like a firework every morning. Genius. And the architecture that looks like it was built from preschoolers' drawings rather than blueprints. Speaking of artwork, the rampant cat-themed statues, paintings, and, of course, balloons can admittedly be a bit much at times, especially when the rendered felines in question have the type of fast food animatronic smiles that make the Cheshire Cat look stable. But don't worry, these are mainly for backdrop purposes. Plus, though technically real and not a work of art, one of the most beautifully designed cats in the entire movie, in my opinion, is the sleeping cat. The colossal two-headed beast on top of which the whole of Bonaparte wit rests, much like the world turtle from Hindu and Chinese mythology. Overall, this playful and vibrant aesthetic, accompanied by a particularly catchy parade-like theme song, crafts for us a domain positively brimming with the promise of fun and adventure. That being said, there are some narrative elements that I think could have done with a little bit more polish. For example, there's a reference to what seems to be a Romeo and Juliet-esque tale of the doomed love between a cat and a mouse. The sequence where they are introduced is quite lovely. The female cat watching sadly as her beloved, a male mouse, leaves his cage to fly away heavenward, toting the full moon into the night sky. But there is no further elaboration upon this, and other than leading rather jarringly to some brief additional bickering between Torias and Choo-Choo, it is never brought up in any way again, diminishing the poignancy it seems to be striving for. And then there's Booberina's take over the world scheme. Even for a film as absurd as this, almost nothing in her plan makes any sense whatsoever. Then again, she does treat her balloon ability, utterly silly in and of itself, like a cool superpower rather than a curse of being unable to touch anything without effectively losing it. So, yeah. In the end, I think all one can do is just chalk this all up to her demonstrable insanity and move on. There are some other inconsistencies, but I really don't want to spoil or harp on these too much. And it is possible that I'm missing something even after all the times I've watched this movie, so I'll just leave it up to you viewers to decide. But whatever this film may lack in logic, it makes up for with what I think is a very sincere moral about the ramifications of forgetting the good in one's past and letting the bad shape one's present and future. This is explored quite well through multiple characters and in multiple ways, some over the top, some internal and heartfelt. One of the more obvious examples is Papadal, whose transformation into a monster confuses him and muddles his recollection of his owners, exacerbated by his being neglected in the human world. Dodo, Choo-Choo's brother, has fallen prey to a curse that made him fall madly in love with Booberina, rendering him a mindless drone that exists only to fulfill her wishes. Though this is only hinted at, Booberina may once have been a good person, but was then spoiled rotten by her lavish and pampered upbringing. Where this idea really shines, though, is through Torias. Without spoiling anything, Torias epitomizes someone who has been disheartened by life's unfairness. Regardless of how minor that unfairness may be in the grand scheme of things, it is still enough to turn this once starry-eyed boy into a callous jerk who can only deal with it by either making others miserable in turn, or just running away. But sometimes there's nothing quite like the threat of magical curses and world destruction to make someone get their button gear and their priorities straight. In all seriousness, though, while some of these characters exhibit deplorable behavior, making us love to hate them, it's always reiterated that they have the potential to change for the better. There are those who take that opportunity when it comes, and there are others who refuse, preferring to wallow in their own misery or delight in the misery of those who can't fight back. Still, I think kids can take a great lesson out of this, that anyone mean and miserable should be reached out to rather than condemned, because maybe all that they are really looking for is a friend. It is possible that very young children might find this movie a bit intense and or creepy, and even older viewers who enjoy anime might see it as just a little too weird. But for anyone else, Catnapped is a whimsical, energetic romp with a highly creative story, full of entertaining characters, exciting visuals, and wild imagination. Give it a watch for yourself and let it brighten your mood so you can brighten other moods too, human and otherwise. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. I have a rule of thumb regarding creatures of lore. The more versatile the creature, the more interesting I tend to find them. I really do like it when such beings are reimagined, readapted, and or placed in scenarios less than traditional for them in order to create new stories, so long as it's artistically refreshing or thought-provoking and not completely stupid. It goes without saying that one of the most common creatures to which countless authors have tried to do this very thing, to varying degrees of success, is the vampire. In a modern fantasy course I took at LSC back in the fall of 2007, I studied the horror novel Necroscope by Brian Lumley. Though ultimately not a personal favorite, I still found it very intriguing in how it portrayed a classic monster I was familiar with in a way that meshed very well with its 20th century setting, changing its vampire just enough to make it feel original, while at the same time staying faithful to the source material, so to speak. And so, for my midterm assignment, I decided to write about how vampires have been portrayed in more recent fiction. As luck would have it, I found this YA fantasy series literally just in time for me to start developing my essay. And the world of this vampire was far more unique than I could have imagined. I bring you Meredith Ann Pierce's The Darkangel trilogy, comprised of The Darkangel, A Gathering of Gargoyles, and The Pearl of the Soul of the World, published between 1982 and 1990, and recommended for readers 13 and up. Ariel, a young slave girl from the land of Terrain, is burning for revenge after her mistress and friend, Eowyn, is kidnapped by a vampire in order to become his new bride. Upon confronting him, she naturally proves no match for him and is taken away to be a servant to his 13 wives, skeletal mummy-like wraiths that have all lost their blood, hearts, and souls to the vampire, and one of which is the ill-fated Eowyn. But in spite of her grief, Ariel can't help but be enamored by the godlike beauty that masks the vampire's cruelty and intrigued by the spark of goodness and vulnerability she sees in him. She comes to learn that the vampire is in fact not yet a true Darkangel. Only when he takes one last bride, his 14th, will his mother, a Lorelei or water demon known as the White Witch, take the souls he will offer her in tribute and complete his transformation. Though horrified by this knowledge, Ariel finds herself torn between her mission to stop the Lorelei and her growing feelings for the vampire. And even if she is able to save his humanity and his soul without taking his life, Ariel will still need no less than the power of her world's sorcerer gods in order to fight the White Witch and her other 6 vampire sons before they gain the power to spread their eternal darkness and blight across the realm. As mentioned, the primary monster of this story will be very familiar to most readers in design and temperament, yet not so much so that it can't count as an original creation. Besides vampire and Darkangel, this creature has a third name. Icarus. In the famous Greek myth, Daedalus made Icarus, his son, a set of wings out of feathers and wax so that he may fly. Pierce's Icarus's wings are similarly made with the feathers of demonic black birds magically sewn onto him by the Lorelei. I love her description of how, when not in flight, the vampire's wings drape over his shoulders like a cloak, adding a regal touch to his already divine appearance. Not unlike, incidentally, the eponymous heroes of Disney's Gargoyle series. The beauty of this beast is just as alien, but far more treacherous. A striking contrast of cold dead white and all-consuming darkness, the Icarus has the appearance of a fair youth with pale skin, platinum silver hair, and eyes the color of ice, while his wings and clothes are so pitch black as to give off no sheen, swallowing any and all light that shines upon them. Pierce puts one other innovative twist on the vampire, as well as on many of the other beings here. The spelling of their names is changed just slightly in order to further differentiate them from their more traditional counterparts. Some examples are simple, like the replacing of I with Y in Vampire and Lion, and PH with F in Sphinx. Others are more elaborate, like Dwarf, DUAROUGH instead of DWARF. On the surface, it's a small change, and yet it's incredible how much more exotic it makes the characters and the universe they live in feel. And speaking of universes, the Darkangel takes place in an alternate reality in which the moon has been terraformed, made habitable to organic matter and living creatures, and the moon-like celestial body called Oceanus is implied to be planet Earth. Easily one of this world's most spectacular sights, and one of my favorites, is the Sea of Dust, so named because the particles that comprise it are so fine that together they surge and flow just like water. Yet they are also stunningly vibrant, as if trillions upon trillions of precious stones have all been crushed into a fluid rainbow of sand, each wave a new color more dazzling than the last. According to Pierce, the idea for the Darkangel came to her after she read about a dream recounted to Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and founder of analytical psychology. Even in a world as fantastic as this, our protagonist, Ariel, is no less human than we are, fears and flaws included. In spite of, or perhaps because of, the deadly situation she finds herself in, she has to make a conscious effort to face her enemies and conquer her fears, no matter how grotesque or horrifying. This makes her a compelling foil for many of the other characters she encounters, like the vampire. Most vampires have traditionally been painted as suave and arrogant by nature. The vampire Ariel contends with, though he is both of these things, harbors a surprising childishness underneath his evil, made all the more apparent beside Ariel's quiet thoughtfulness and uncertainty. This opens the opportunity, even within such a dangerous and unnatural master-servant relationship, for something that could almost be described as bonding. Pages 69 to 70 of The Darkangel. I shall tell you the tale of the Maiden-Eater, she told him, and began. The tale was a long one, about a kingdom besieged by a dragon, and the king's daughter who slew it, and the young hero who helped her. The vampire laughed outright when she came to describing the worm. Big as a cottage, he cried at last. With wings! It is evident that you have never seen a fire drake. The Icarus folded his arms and leaned back, looking down on her, his lips curled in contempt. No mere mortal could have killed one single-handed. Her sword was magic, said Ariel. The dragon would have killed them both long before she could have used it. Ariel looked at the ground. You have seen dragons, my lord. Oh yes, my mother keeps a pair as pets. Ariel looked at him. Your mother? She said. The word sounded strange from his tongue. His lips twisted again into a smile. I do have a mother, he said. How did you suppose I came to be? His tone was amused and had no kindness in it. Ariel dropped her eyes and mumbled something. The Icarus pursed his lips a moment, and his look grew farther away. She is very beautiful, my mother. Ariel let another moment go by before she spoke. What is her name? She ventured at last. And how would I know that? Replied the vampire, affronted. Great personages such as she do not hand out their names so freely. But you are her son, insisted Ariel softly. The vampire looked suddenly away, and for the first time his cool assurance flagged. She will tell me, he began. "She has promised to tell me, when I come of age." "And is she like you?" asked Ariel, wondering what sort of being mothered vampires. His hesitation had surprised her. "You mean a winged Icarus?" he asked, regaining himself and flexing his coal dark feathers. They rustled like fine stiff silk. "No, she prefers water to air. She is a Lorelei." "And she keeps dragons?" "Yes." To borrow a concept from Joseph Campbell, what makes Ariel such an endearing and relatable character is her very human wish to refuse the call to adventure. All she really wants is acceptance and love, both from others and within herself, and only by enduring many hardships can she ever hope to achieve this, and even then there is no guarantee that she actually will. Throughout the story, Ariel receives marvelous gifts and abilities to help her in her quest. As a result, many people, especially the dangerously superstitious ones, begin to see her as a powerful sorceress comparable even to a god. But this only serves to make Ariel feel increasingly alienated and discouraged rather than confident. Pages 76 to 78 of A Gathering of Gargoyles. The gargoyle snarled, dog-like, and snapped. It was all over one even shade of gray. Even its eyes and teeth and tongue were gray. Its shabby, matted fur stood on end. A collar of yellow metal encircled its throat. Ariel gazed upon it from the hearth. She felt her heart contract. Beside her, Nat shrank against Galnor. Just then the beast caught sight of Ariel, its gray eyes wild and wide. It padded toward her. Those in its path shrank away from it. Some held daggers, but none dared strike. Ariel half rose, put her bandolin from her. She could see the creature's skeletal ribs, ridges of spine along its back. Her knees gave way. "Grayling," she whispered. "Grayling, first gargoyle ever I tamed. What has become of you? You are all bone beneath the skin." For a moment the gargoyle stared at her, lips pulled back from its broken teeth, tongue loose and lolling. It panted hoarsely. Its tattered ears lay flat against the skull. Ariel held out her arms to it. The beast bellied down before her on the floor. It crept forward, a strange whine gibbering from its throat. Its curved claws scattered the rushes, scathed the floorboards underneath. The creature reached her knees. Ariel bent to stroke it as the gray beast laid its huge and grisly head upon her lap. "A sorceress," someone whispered then. "The Storier's a witch. See how she has charmed the beast." Ariel did not look up, was aware of the inn guest shifting uneasily, of Nat staring from Galnor's arms. The bandits of Arl gazed upon her in outright rage. Ariel stroked the gargoyle's heavy, strange head, fingered its matted, thin fur. "What has become of you?" she murmured again. "You do not look as though you have tasted food since you left me. Eat this." She reached into her pack. "More sorceries!" a woman cried. "What's that in her hand?" "A jewel." "A dagger." Ariel dusted the fine fuzz from the apricot, held it out. The gargoyle ate eagerly, almost desperately, strained to swallow against the collar about its throat. Its gray tongue slathered, catching the runnels of blood-colored juice. "Witchery," she heard someone muttering. Another voice, across the room, half shouted, "She will charm us all!" Ariel looked up then, saw people fall back as she raised her eyes. The hard faces of the Arlish bandits made her skin creep. The gargoyle stared at them, lip twitching into a snarl. "Come, Grayling," she murmured. "I do not like our company. Let's be gone." Ariel wishes only for inner peace, yet not only is she confronted with forces greater than anything she could ever hope to understand, but many of those she would save would rather worship and fear her than befriend and love her. Sacrifice is one of the central themes of this story. Sometimes even something as powerful as love can be reduced to a simple hindrance in the face of doing what is best for the world. Is it a sign of truer love to care for the happiness of another, or to ensure the continued existence of creation itself? To take one magical creature and place it into an untraditional setting for the sake of a story, and do it well, is no simple feat. To do this with a myriad of creatures in a setting whose theoretical roots stem from science fiction, and do it marvelously, is a sure sign of masterful storytelling. And all this while crafting a tale of devotion, loss, personal growth, and the finding of one's identity. Such is the splendor of the Darkangel. Whether you come for the heroine's journey, the vampire's bite, or the moon's magic, there is something here to stir the imagination of many a fantasy fan. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. Warning, this episode contains material that may be disturbing to younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised. It was a dark and chilly night, many years ago. There I was in my workshop, wandering through that online domain one inevitably gets to after jumping from YouTube horror video to YouTube horror video until the wee hours of the morning. Long after 3 a.m., I found the strangest video yet. The thumbnail looked pretty cool, but the title seemed to cheapen it. What on earth, I asked myself, does Sonic the Hedgehog have to do with noodles? Maybe someone had made up one of those DIY food recipes with a story theme. You know, like Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham? Or Bruce Bogtrotter's chocolate cake, inspired by Roald Dahl's Matilda. Now officially curious, I clicked the video. At first, I just skimmed through it without listening to see what I was in for. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I was a bit disappointed to see that it was just clips from a bunch of different Sonic games, nothing I hadn't seen before. Still not understanding what kind of video this was, but being too tired to watch it fully just then, I decided to skim again, this time listening to a segment here and there to try and at least get a basic idea. I was slightly less confused, but still confused in the end. And so, I looked up other videos with similar titles, after a good night's sleep, of course. When I finally understood, I felt somewhat glad that I didn't watch that first video from start to finish in the middle of the night, after which I thought to myself, the internet is a weird, weird place. Not that I didn't already know that, but this certainly helped to further solidify that conviction. Prepare to shudder with Creepypastas, first appearing online circa 1990, and recommended for audiences 17 and up. A creepypasta is a horror story that has originated on and been continually copy-pasted around the internet, usually in the form of an image or a block of text. These stories may stem either from an existing event or piece of pop culture or from a wholly original idea, the common thread being its gory, shocking, or otherwise disturbing content. The word itself evolved from the internet slang term copy-pasta. The true origins of the creepypasta are unknown, making an exact study of its history difficult. This is mainly due to many early creepypastas being written and posted anonymously. One claim among many is that the first creepypastas emerged with the advent of reposted chain email texts on internet forums. In any case, these early stories were like urban legends in that they were fairly realistic and believable. But over time, creepypastas have become increasingly supernatural in nature. Moreover, most creepypasta creators today prefer to give out their names in order to garner recognition as legitimate writers. As a result, copying and pasting these writings has become rare, as many in the creepypasta community now see this as intellectual theft. Arguably the most famous creepypasta character of all is the Slender Man, created in 2009 by Eric Knudsen of the Something Awful forum. This thin, unnaturally tall humanoid creature wears a black business suit and possesses a featureless face and tentacle-like arms. It usually targets children and young adults, causing numerous afflictions such as paranoia, delusions, and nightmares. While the Slender Man has proven popular enough to inspire video games, films, and fanfiction, it also, unfortunately, led to the horrific 2014 incident in which two 12-year-olds attempted to murder a classmate as a sacrifice to the monster. Thoughts and prayers to the victim and all those involved. Creepypasta website and forum administrators and community members have since expressed condolences and overwhelming support to the victim and her family, even helping to raise money for medical costs. They have further reiterated that while they do specialize in making and sharing scary stories, they do not condone real threats or acts of violence. Theirs is a literary community whose purpose is to encourage the growth and inspiration of aspiring authors, dark and gruesome though their subject matter is. As the creepypasta has evolved, so have readers' tastes with regards to theme, style, and quality. From crazed murderers like Jeff the Killer, to demonic creatures like Smile Dog, to haunted objects like The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask game cartridge in Ben Drowned, virtually every trick and trope in the horror genre's repertoire has been utilized in a creepypasta's creation. Older and shorter ones tended to fall into one of three categories. Number 1, the anecdote, in which the narrator recites a frightening event from his or her own past, i.e. Ted the Caver, Candle Cove, and Abandoned by Disney. Number 2, the ritual, in which the audience is given instructions that, if followed, will cause something scary to happen, i.e. Bloody Mary. And number 3, the lost episode, in which the narrator tells of an unaired episode of a famous and generally lighthearted TV show that involves distorted audio and video and/or characters behaving strangely, often to the point of graphic violence or death to themselves or others, i.e. Squidward's suicide from SpongeBob SquarePants, Dead Bart from The Simpsons, and SuicideMouse.avi from Disney. Today's creepypastas are much more elaborate in conception and presentation. Easily some of the most fascinating, for instance, are those that stem from fan theories of well-known franchises. There are way too many to list here, let alone describe in detail, but some prominent examples include the Squall is Dead theory from Final Fantasy VIII, the Numbers Station from Fallout 3, the Gygus equals fetus theory from Earthbound, the Garfield hallucination theory from Garfield, the post-depression theory from Scooby-Doo Where Are You, and Ashes in a Coma from the Pokemon anime, just to name a few. But of course, like any piece of literature, some creepypastas are better written than others. Even basic mistakes or inadequacies in word choice, world building, and character development are all it takes to ruin the experience. One example I know of is the story The Theater of Puppets, inspired by the song The Puppet Master by Danish heavy metal band King Diamond. The idea and setup are very promising. I do love me a good gothic horror story, but the less than professional writing makes it fall pretty flat. To give you an idea, here is an excerpt from the story as seen on creepypasta.wikia.com. The puppet master and his wife entered. I couldn't speak, as I was shocked. Emergencia put the lantern on a shelf, and the puppet master went to an altar with ancient books and human skulls on it, lit a few black candles, which lighted up the room a bit. I saw a strange symbol on the wall. The master started chanting magical words from ancient tongues. I felt some kind of magic inside me. I got afraid, and in panic, kicked one of the shelves with the jars. One of them fell down and broke. In light, the liquid was red. It was blood. The puppet master turned to me and said, "How dare you disturb my work?" And in that moment, a demon's head, red as blood, appeared on the wall. I felt a sting in my eyes. They were given eternal life because of the disturbance in the ritual. The puppet master continued chanting, and I could feel my soul leaving my body and felt a tingle in my skin. The tingle grew in pain, and I felt magic in me. In the next moment, I lost my consciousness. All that being said, in my experience, I find that the best way to get the most out of a creepypasta, rather than reading it oneself, is to listen to someone tell it, especially in the form of videos. Not movies with plots and acting, but simply recordings of a single person telling the story, with the aid of background music, a few images, and maybe a sudden sound effect or two for good measure. There are numerous video makers out there that specialize in creepypasta retellings, but my favorite is the YouTuber Creepypasta. Regardless of a given story's quality, his measured and proficient voice, mixed with top-notch editing skills and image choices, make the experience all the more deliciously frightening. Take his video retelling of The Girl in the Photograph. Warning, spoilers ahead. As he narrates, an image of a pretty girl holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign is all that comprises the visuals, until the final line. The accommodating image change is so quick and abrupt that I jumped during my first viewing, my adrenaline rushing long after the video had ended. The Girl in the Photograph. Original author unknown, retold by Creepypasta. YouTube video uploaded January 7th, 2013. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class, doing math. It was 6 more minutes until school let out. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked to the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful, he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or have ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately, she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of his bed, walked toward his window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day, again he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said, sorry, no. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when he was suddenly hit by a car. He died instantly, picture in hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. He saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. Horror stories have been told both for as long as humanity has known fear and as long as storytelling has existed, through voice, in print, and on screen. But it is only the creepypasta that has its place solely online. What makes the creepypasta an especially unique form of narrative expression, let alone horror fiction, is that it wouldn't be what it is, or even be at all, without the internet. A powerful technological system and an abstract worldwide entity, rather than a classified artistic medium like books and TV. It's also opened up a whole new avenue through which writers can scare their audiences, and through which new audiences can get their scares. And with the right words in the proper context, What's told by the glow of a computer screen can be just as atmospheric and spine-tingling as anything told by the glow of a campfire. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. As much as I absolutely adored my Game Boy as a kid, I often found myself wishing for a home video game console. I was especially envious of my older cousins, who seemed to own every major Sega and Nintendo system under the sun at the time. Game Boy, Game Gear, NES, SNES, Genesis, N64, Saturn, you name it. But all that changed on Christmas Day, 1997, when my wish was granted in the form of a PlayStation. My 11-year-old self rejoiced. We started out with Frogger and a few demo discs, but in time we would come to expand and personalize our game collection. About a year later, for the combined birthdays of my step-siblings and me, we each received our first personal PlayStation games. For my sports-loving stepbrother, Cool Borders 2. For my lovably quirky stepsister, Crash Bandicoot Warped. And for me, a game which not only featured my favorite mythical creature, but was ultimately one of the first games in my life of which I truly felt like a master. Coming in hot, literally, Spyro the Dragon. Released by Insomniac Games on September 9th, 1998, and rated E for everyone for some comic mischief. The Dragon Kingdom has long been a place of beauty and prosperity. Comprising it are 5 worlds, each one ruled by a family of dragons. With their own unique talents and gifts, each family protects the kingdom and lives in peaceful harmony with one another. The only blemish in this paradise is a 6th world, ruled by Nasty Nork, a repugnant, ill-tempered creature with a bad habit of dabbling in forbidden magic. Still, all goes well. Until one rather arrogant dragon makes the foolish mistake of mocking Nasty during a live TV interview, which, unfortunately, the latter just happens to be watching. In a fit of rage, the half-gnome, half-orc casts a magic spell to imprison all of the dragons inside crystal statues. What's worse, not only does he steal and enchant the dragon's gemstones, transforming them into his own personal soldiers and monsters, but he also invites thieves bent on stealing the dragon's precious eggs. Little does Nasty realize, however, that he hasn't quite ensnared all of the dragons like he first thought. Spyro, the youngest and most mischievous dragon of all, is missed by the crystallization curse due to his small stature, as well as his playing hooky at the time. Now the only unfrozen dragon left, and joined by his best friend, Sparks the Dragonfly, Spyro sets out to free his elders and recover their treasure and their eggs before Nasty and his armies take over the Dragon Kingdom forever. With the exceptions of Pokemon Red and Blue, which I played avidly for several years, I've always preferred single-player platformers over larger role-playing games because I find them more straightforward and less overwhelming. That it was so approachable for me as a player was the first thing I grew to love about Spyro. Spyro comes equipped with 3 primary abilities: fire-breathing, naturally, and charging, for attacking enemies or barriers specific to each, and gliding, for reaching areas too far for jumping. In addition, there is the supercharge, Running along specialized ramps with glowing arrows increases Spyro's speed, giving him brief invincibility through a more powerful charge attack, as well as a huge boost in gliding distance. Plus, there are special levels in which Spyro can actually fly, although these function more like bonus rounds than levels in that they must be completed perfectly before a timer runs out. I think the decision to have Spyro fly only periodically is a good one, because it keeps the game from becoming too easy and the pleasure of flight from becoming stale. Spyro also has allies to aid him as well. There are the balloonists, who transport Spyro from world to world after he accomplishes certain tasks, though why their dialogue is presented through text boxes and not voices while everyone else talks, I don't know. There are also the fairies, providing the game's save options at the Dragon's crystal platforms, keeping Spyro from falling when his glides fail, or even literally fueling his flames with invincibility with a fairy kiss. But his greatest ally, and the cleverest game mechanic, is Sparx, who isn't just a piece of wordplay on the term dragon, though I do think that is a cool idea. Sparx not only picks up nearby gems and other items that Spyro might miss, but he himself also acts as the player's health meter. Through him, Spyro is able to take 4 hits before dying. At full health, Sparx shines a glittering gold. After 1 hit, his color dims into a flickering light blue. 2 hits, he is a dull pale green. 3 hits, he disappears completely, leaving Spyro undefended from a final blow. Even now, I don't think I've ever seen such an innovative health mechanic in a video game before. Not only does this rid the screen of the otherwise boring and intrusive health bar, it creatively demonstrates Sparx's magical nature and his loyalty to his friend without him uttering a single word, aside from the occasional buzz or two. Sparx can regain energy by eating butterflies, which appear whenever Spyro flames or charges smaller animals, like sheep, chickens, frogs, mice, or bats. A rather arbitrary design choice, but a fun one nonetheless, regardless of whether you actually need the butterflies or not. Much of this game's appeal comes from exploring all the vastly different worlds and their levels. There are 6 levels scattered throughout each world, accessible via magical portals. The environments range from bright and cheerful, to dark and spooky, to strange and mysterious, and the dragons who inhabit them all reflect the nature of their respective cultures with their own unique designs and personalities, and vice versa. Also fleshing out these personal and geographical identities is the soundtrack. Former Police drummer Stuart Copeland composed the game's music with a progressive rock flair, utilizing synthesized guitar, sports organ, and rock drums. These songs are not only catchy as heck, they present players with a sense of contemporary action and fun, matching the spirit of the characters without sacrificing or clashing with the overall game's signature fantasy vibe. There are the artisans, prim and proper dragons of culture and creative expression, who come together in the lush, sunny valleys and rolling hillsides to share their artistic ideas and innovations. The peacekeepers, a race of warriors and battle strategists residing in dry deserts, rocky canyons, and icy caves, and whose brute strength is matched only by their unshakable sense of honor. The magic crafters, wise and solitary guardians of all things mystical, who make their homes within the high distant mountaintops in order to practice their art in peace. The beast makers, genial swamp, jungle, and forest dwellers who use plants and other earth materials to shape new creatures into being and maintain the natural order of life. And the dream weavers, soft-spoken, wistful, and whose minds remain ever literally and figuratively in the clouds, and who are responsible for providing their fellow dragons with pleasant dreams and restful nights. It is impressive how much insight we get into the characters of Spyro and the other dragons through cutscenes lasting a mere 20 seconds or less. Upon being freed, most dragons will offer the player hints and tips for progressing through the game. But it's fine even if they don't, because in fact, the real treat comes from seeing what exactly they're going to do when they're revealed, and Spyro's reaction to it. In essence, Spyro is a kid, acting exactly how many kids do when surrounded by caring, albeit often silly, adults. That's not to say the older dragons are depicted as dumb compared to Spyro, nor does he ever act at all mean-spirited toward them. Their interactions with each other are humorously indicative of how some kids, while they may love their family, don't always know how to respond to some of the random or outdated things they may do or say. Most of the elders are wise, stern, and/or cautious, reminding Spyro to stay focused on his mission, like Nestor. Others can be a bit vain, especially regarding their own physical appearance or prowess, like Gavin. Some are tempted to ramble on or start off on a long and boring speech, like Astor. And there are some that are a wee bit over-enthusiastic, like Bubba, but the funniest are the ones that are forgetful, if not totally senile, like Altair. I swear, this one cutscene alone just cracks me up every single time. Then there are the monsters that try to hinder Spyro, though hinder might be a strong word. As the game progresses, they only get creatively funnier and funnier looking. Not to mention dumber, but I mean that in a good way. Among others, there are jerk shepherds and witch doctors who whack you over the head with their staffs, armor-wearing savages who charge at you only to head straight off a cliff if they miss, feather-brained wizards who literally run in circles in panic if you catch them, and cannon-crazed soldiers who taunt the player with mooning. No, seriously. While the PlayStation brand never established an official mascot the way Nintendo and Sega did, Spyro was a very close contender for the title. Such has been the funny, colorful, imaginative, kid and adult-friendly popularity of Spyro the Dragon. His name lives on through numerous sequels, reboots, and spin-offs, some better than others. But his very first adventure will always have a special place in my heart, as I first played it during a time when the sky really did feel like the limit. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. Warning, this story contains graphic depictions of animal cruelty and themes of religious fanaticism, racism, and genocide. Listener and researcher discretion is advised. I once read a phrase in a book years ago that has stuck with me ever since. This is because it perfectly sums up a sentiment I have regarding pets. I'm not anti-dog, I'm just pro-cat. I don't dislike dogs, but in general they're a little too hyper for me, while cats are calmer and more peaceful. But there's another reason I love cats. Now, I am neither a historian nor an animal expert, but from what I understand, cats seem to have contributed much more to world history, mythology, and culture. From the illustrious cat-worshipping practices of ancient Egypt to the ridiculously popular cat memes and videos that dominate the internet today. Though cats are already placed on a high pedestal for their intelligence, grace, and beauty, what if there is still more to them than meets the eye? Are cats truly no different from other animals that seem to live only to eat, sleep, play, and mate until they die? Or do their minds hold secrets and mysteries more wondrous or terrible than we feeble-minded humans could ever have imagined? All this and more is explored in Akif Perinchi's Felidae, first published as a novel in 1989, and then adapted into an animated film in 1994, and strongly recommended for mature audiences only. Much to his eternal dismay and chagrin, Francis, a domestic house cat in 1980s Germany, is forced to move with his well-meaning but dim-witted owner, Gustav, again. However, this quickly becomes the least of his problems. In his new backyard, he comes across a grisly sight, the body of a fellow cat, his throat brutally slashed. And this is not the first. Several cats have been turning up dead for weeks. While this could easily be dismissed as just another senseless killing by a human, Francis, being the observant, detail-oriented intellectual that he is not so sure. Certain that a feline serial killer is on the loose, he begins to gather information from the other cats of his new neighborhood. Some kindly, some crazy, but all broken in some way. And as Francis digs ever deeper into this blood-soaked mystery, he comes to realize that the answer may not only threaten the survival of his kind, but challenge the very cycle of life itself. Though I watched Felidae long before I read it, I watched video reviews before even that. It wasn't until I read the book that I realized how easily the adaptation can be seen as little more than a strange and obscure German film for fans of cult horror or adult animation. While the movie is certainly one of the better and more faithful book-to-film adaptations that I'm familiar with, this is one time when I think it really is best to experience the book along with it to really get the story's full effect. One of the film's most striking traits is its surprisingly light and pleasant animation for a plot this dark and disturbing. Movies like A Scanner Darkly, Akira, or Fritz the Cat may be cartoons, but their styles and presentations still have a very adult aesthetic. In contrast, I still find it weirdly unnerving to see these Don Bluth-esque cats lying mutilated in their own gore. Definitely a unique, if questionably palatable choice on the filmmaker's part. Needless to say, this talking cat detective story is far from cute. The cats of this universe are depicted as being just as intelligent, if not more, than humans. But this is not the only way Perinci makes his cats look superior. He also endows them with a sort of holiness in their speech and social customs. For one, the cats refer to each other not as cats, but as brothers and sisters, and it's established that the real reason cats don't talk to humans has nothing to do with language. Simply put, to do so is sacrilege. As Francis quotes on page 261, "The untouchable may not exchange a single word with the impure, even if they're in danger of dying." Of course, this doesn't mean they're above using the same crass and sarcastic vocabulary as many human adults. One prominent slang term they use is can opener, to describe humans whose only supposed function is to open cat food cans. These cats are more than well versed in human objects, trends, and concepts. Our especially clever and inquisitive narrator, Francis, often peppers his witty remarks with pop culture or history references to get his point across. For example, page 18. In comparison to this maltreated creature, even Quasimodo would have had a realistic chance of becoming a male model. Page 151. He was gone. He had disappeared into thin air, had long ago parted for the yellow submarine land from which he may well have come. Pages 24 through 25. From hippie life on Crete to yuppie stress in Manhattan, from cocoa leaf chewing to Calvin Klein jeans, Archie had already done it and much more, except perhaps not joining the NASA boys for their moon landing. Which, to be honest, does disappoint me. I think Francis's chemistry with local cat Bluebeard, his new partner as it were, also adds to the noir vibe. Personality-wise, Bluebeard strikes me as the Daisuke Jigen to Francis's Lupin III, blunt and quick-tempered, with an ironic sense of humor, but also possessing a cynical yet pragmatic wisdom that can sometimes make Francis seem almost naive and idealistic by comparison. And yet, despite a harsh attitude that matches his severely disfigured facade, Bluebeard proves an invaluable guide and loyal friend to Francis. Pages 32 through 36. "Another cold sack?" I asked him, not wanting to beat around the bush. I caught him by surprise, but in seconds he had already composed himself, assuming his stoic Humphrey Bogart look. "A cold sack," he confessed after a brief pause. "What member of our God-fearing community got it this time? Stop. Wait a minute. It was a guy, wasn't it? Just like the other 4 corpses." Now he showed open astonishment. "How the hell did you find that out?" "Just a guess." The monster limped into the room, snorted, then crouched down beside me with a worried expression on his face. "This time it was good old Deep Purple who said his last goodbye. His neck looked so bad you'd think someone used it to try it as new ice pick. As far as I'm concerned, they could have turned that dimwit a-hole into dog food. But all these dudes kicking the bucket is beginning to give me the jitters. Who knows? Maybe the guy with the strange hobby will someday have the pleasure of sinking his teeth into my own neck." "Where's Deep Purple's corpse now?" "In Peter Fonda's garage. Do you want to go on with your clever investigation?" "If you have nothing against it. How about showing me where it is?" "Why not?" he said, yawning, his inimitable coolness having since returned. He turned to go, but before he could quite get into gear, I caught up with him with a quick leap and looked deep down into his one uninjured eye, the eye that sparkled all the more brightly because it was the only one he had left. "You never did tell me your name, wise ass," I said. He smiled wearily, then brushed lightly past me out the balcony door. "Bluebeard," he said outside. "But don't ask me now who my can opener is. Otherwise I'll be the one who have to puke." But as logical as Francis is, he is not spared from the nightmares that plague him as the murders multiply. Whether they are as bloody and demented as anything Clive Barker could dream up, or so strange and ethereal as to shatter the heart, neither in the novel nor the movie does Perinci hold back on the creativity, the viciousness, or most importantly, the symbolism. Throughout Francis's quest for the truth, in his visions as well as in real life, a key question is raised. What if, due to all the centuries of domestication, mankind destroyed more within cats than just their ancient primeval instincts? What if they have fallen from grace, the way Adam and Eve did? Pages 173 to 174. Everything that ever was and ever will be no longer has any meaning, Francis, he said, and his sad voice echoed into infinity. The only thing that's important is that you now change sides and come to us. Come with us. The huge army of my brothers and sisters in the background affirmed in unison. Come with us, Francis. You'll find something better than death everywhere. The murderer turned away from me and floated over to the others. Then he became a tiny part of the crowd and looked back once again. Come with us, Francis, he insisted. Come with us on a long, wonderful trip. Now they turned their backs on me and wandered leisurely into the thickening mist. Where are you going? I called after them. To Africa, to Africa, to Africa, they called out with one voice until they gradually disappeared into the mist. And what will we find there? I still wanted to know. Everything we lost, Francis. Everything we lost, I heard them whispering. But they were now lost to sight. They had already become one with the magical mist. Slowly, an unbearable sadness filled me, because I had not followed them, because I had been afraid to set out on the long journey, because I was now completely alone. Africa! It sounded so alluring, so mysterious, so exciting. Everything you ever dreamed about was there, my unerring instincts whispered to me. Africa! The lost paradise, El Dorado, the promised land, where once, long ago, everything had its beginning. Yet Africa was so unimaginably far away, and I was only a comfort-loving four-legged animal used to thinking in terms of short distances. The nocturnal songs of the gods were strange to me. So too, the hot wind of the savannah. Never had I slept under a canopy of stars, and never had I set foot in the sacred jungle. Africa! But where was Africa? In any case, not in me, not in my yearnings, not in my heart. It was somewhere else, very far from me, irrevocably far from me. And yet, take me with you, I wept quietly to myself. Take me with you, my brothers and sisters. But perhaps even more prominent, what if cats, or any animals really, became more like man, to the point where they essentially became man, in all his sick, stupid, and tainted glory? While it may be easy to compare this to works like Richard Adams's Watership Down or George Orwell's Animal Farm, Felidae stands out from other non-sugar-coated critiques of mankind's faults through the eyes of intelligent animals. On a much deeper and more complex level than I've seen in either a gritty crime drama or an animal adventure tale, it frames the concept of racial superiority in the form of questions regarding the supposedly inherent nature of a given species, and even the very nature of God and a living creature's place in the universe. Felidae is an enthralling detective story with many more mysteries than simply whodunit, not the least of which is, do we own our pets, or do they own us? Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. I don't mean to boast, but I decided one day to perform a random act of kindness for my younger sister. I bought her the DVD, Labyrinth, one of her favorite movies, as well as mine. Before watching it, we first decided to go through the trailers, just to see if there was anything interesting. I don't know about her, but one trailer certainly caught my attention. It was an ad for a TV show, another creation of the legendary Jim Henson. A narrator invites viewers to, quote, a magical world where tales of fantasy and adventure come true, during which we are treated to a montage of enticing fairy tale images. Ancient castles, beautiful princesses, brave adventurers, strange creatures, and true love. But what about the show itself? Does it live up to its promise? All that and more, my dear listeners. All that and more. Let us now gather around the fire and hear Jim Henson's The Storyteller. First airing in 1987 through 1988, with a spin-off, The Storyteller, Greek Myths, in 1990, and recommended for viewers 7 and up. In a castle with no name, in a land of shadow and dust, an old man rests in his tattered armchair, a goblet of wine at his side and a warm fire blazing in the hearth before him. A strange old man he is, ears like saucers, a nose like a cherry, his hair like snow-laden grass, and his robe a mishmash of faded colors and threadbare patches. In another mystical part of the world known as Greece, there is another man, an Athenian thief with little but the rags on his back. Deep within the maze of the dreaded Minotaur, he wanders in search of treasure, even as he seeks a way to escape the passages as cunning as he. But you mustn't be fooled by these appearances, for these are no ordinary souls. With a twinkle in their eyes and but a few words, they have the power to conjure whole worlds, revive eras long past, and bring the most glorious visions to life. In short, they are each a storyteller. And so, night after night, and accompanied by their loyal, though rather snarky dog, these sages of the spoken word regale their audience with tales of beauty, valor, joy, sorrow, and wisdom, and all with their own very unique flair. Both the original and Greek myth series were developed and written by Anthony Minghella, who directed such renowned films as The English Patient, The Talented Mr. Ripley, and Cold Mountain. The first series consists of 9 episodes and focuses primarily on the retelling of more obscure European folk tales, a combination of German, Russian, and Celtic. The spin-off miniseries consists of 4 episodes and focuses, as the subtitle states, on the myths of ancient Greece. Both shows are formatted with a framing device of their respective storyteller in the, quote, real world, introducing a story, which makes up each episode proper. Like many of Henson's works, the storyteller features a combination of human actors and puppets, with the former taking on the lead roles. The original storyteller was played by the late John Hurt, of Watership Down, The Elephant Man, and 1984 fame. Henson originally intended the eponymous character to be a puppet himself, but eventually decided to instead have him played by an actor wearing heavy makeup. Thanks to this design choice, as well as his superb acting, Hurt reminds me greatly of characters like Merlin from Disney's Sword in the Stone and Brother Aiden from Tom Moore's The Secret of Kells. Despite his impish appearance and humble surroundings, he seems to possess a borderline wizardly insight and power that one can't help but be awed by. But he also has a lively creative zest and a grandfatherly charm and amiability, punctuated from time to time by some goofy but still very human absent-mindedness. The Greek myth storyteller was played by Michael Gambon, better known to Harry Potter film fans as Albus Dumbledore from The Prisoner of Azkaban onward. Though physically younger and more robust than his European counterpart, he is no less wise and candid, as fascinated and reverent of the ruins around him as a historian or archaeologist. With elegant speech and a rich, strong voice, he projects an almost royal, warrior-like nobility as he honors Greece's greatest tragedies, treating their heroes, gods, and monsters with the dignity and respect that such tales are due. But honestly, what's a Jim Henson production without the puppets? The other half of both main casts is the dog. His gravelly voice, courtesy of Henson's son Brian, will be instantly recognizable to Labyrinth fans as that of the delightfully cantankerous dwarf, Hoggle. Aside from being the literal audience within the show, the dog also represents us, the viewing audience. As excitable as he is cynical, he often interrupts the storytellers with questions and remarks, nitpicking and correcting any detail mistakes, but generally becoming emotional in spite of himself when the stories get really good. Plus, the dog injects a healthy dose of comic relief in a show that might otherwise have ended up overly grim or somber, no matter how interesting or beautiful the legend in question. I think the juxtaposing of real and synthetic creatures is both smart and entertaining. The practical and green screen effects and the makeup on the humanoid creature actors are applied and performed with so much heart, care, and authenticity. From the beastly but noble-hearted Hans the Grovelhog to the Grey-Eye, three haggard sisters with one eye between them. But the meticulous, imaginative designs of the puppets and masterful performances of their puppeteers and voice actors ensure that they steal every scene that they're in. And the creators weren't at all afraid to make them as creepy, outlandish, or fanciful as their given stories. From the spindly, blood-red devils from The Soldier and Death, and the gluttonous, ear-piercing griffin from The Luck Child, to the majestic, beautifully white thought lion from The True Bride, and the ominously arrogant vulture from Daedalus and Icarus. Both shows have two primary strengths. The first is relatability. Sometimes either storyteller will begin narrating straight away, but most often he may be reminded of a tale by something quite ordinary. After getting rid of a spider for the terrified dog and admitting to him his own fear of rats, the European storyteller decides to speak of a unique lad, aptly named Fear Not, to while away the dark, frightening hours. Likewise, the Athenian storyteller enters a room filled with statues of cold-eyed soldiers, while the dog finds a half-buried stone head from which snakes rise up like beckoning fingers, the head of the dreaded Medusa. The storyteller is thus prompted to recite the myth of Perseus and the Gorgon. The second strength is immersion. Both shows apply inventive ways to merge the real and fantasy worlds together to simulate the atmosphere of listening to an oral tale, even as we still literally see what is happening on screen. This can be as simple as some well-executed camera edits and dissolves in which a story character drops an object in one shot and that same object appears by the storyteller in the next. A more fantastic example is when he speaks while standing near a painting and we see the character's silhouettes move inside it accordingly. And it's especially fun whenever he and the dog watch the characters, in miniaturized form, as if they are actually present. In one such scene, Fear Not cheerfully dips his feet into a pond that just happens, in reality, to be the dog's water dish. One of the gifts of Jim Henson was that he could make it very easy for us to forget that his puppets are just that, puppets. Illusions, fantasies, creations of foam and fleece. But why would we want to remember such a thing anyway? The same principle applies to good stories, and the storyteller provides children with an excellent introduction and education. Striking just the right balance between funny, thrilling, and romantic, this series retells these timeless classics in a mature and sincere way that respects the intelligence of younger audiences, utilizing the whimsy and charm that Henson is known for. These are among the masters whose standards I always try to adhere to, as an aspiring teller and collector of tales. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. If there's one regret that I have, it's that I never took up an instrument as a child, as I was too focused on keeping my grades in check. That's not to say I didn't get my music fix in my education. I did the next best thing and became a choir singer. Due to the myriad musical tastes of my various teachers, the repertoire of songs I performed became increasingly eclectic over the years. From Billboard hits and Latin hymns, to indigenous chants and Christmas jingles, both instrumental and a cappella, and even with props once in a while. By the time I became a second alto in high school, I'd gained a special appreciation for group vocalization and music. Choirs truly remind me of the dedication it takes not only to develop one's singing voice to artistic levels, but to do it as a team, creating richer, more powerful sounds. And few exemplify that dedication, or that power, better than these boys. Let us now ascend with the sound of Libera, performing from 1995 to the present, and safe for listeners of all ages. Libera was founded by Robert Priseman, British composer, graduate of the Royal College of Music, and choir master since 1970. Its first members came from the Anglican parish of St. Philip's, Norbury, in South London, releasing their first commercial album under the name St. Philip's Choir. In 1990, they released their second, this time under the new name Angel Voices. The group would use both names on subsequent albums throughout the 90s. It was in 1999 that the group took Libera as its official commercial name when Priseman released a CD containing remixes of his song Libera, and the group released what would be their self-titled album later that same year. The Latin singular of liberare, or to free, the name comes from the group's signature song, based on the Libera Me portion of the Requiem Mass. Not only have they toured in numerous countries all over North America, Europe, and Asia, but they've even had the honor of singing for two popes, Pope Benedict XVI in 2008 and Pope Francis in 2016. They also became a registered charity in 2007 with a U.S. arm set up in 2014. Soundtrack contributions include the films Shadowlands and Hannibal, among others, and, one of my personal favorites, soloist Stephen Garrity featured on the PlayStation 2 game Ico. Consisting of approximately 40 members, ranging in age from 8 to 16 from all over London, most possess unchanged boy soprano or treble voices, with the lower parts being sung by the teens. As their director, Priseman strives to emphasize the different qualities and ranges of the boys' voices, both individually as soloists and together as a group. Priseman structures nearly all of Libera's songs in one of two ways. Some pieces, like Time, are his own original compositions, his gift for poetic lyrics complementing the exquisitely solemn nature of the music they are paired with. Other times he arranges new songs from classical or contemporary pieces. Regarding the former, I'm especially impressed by songs whose source material was originally instrumental, such as Air, based on Air on the G string by Johann Sebastian Bach, Lacrimosa, based on the Aquarium movement of Camille Saint-Saëns' The Carnival of the Animals, and The Fountain, based on Prelude in C minor by Frédéric Chopin. Libera projects a distinct aura of comfort and tranquility. Their album covers feature numerous symbols of peace, especially white ones: doves, swans, sunlight, clouds, stars, and snow, just to name a few. They will often perform in their signature white cowls, or hooded robes, especially when live. I think Libera means to touch listeners, namely ordinary people, who strive and long for a better world and a better future. The booklets of their first two albums, Libera and Luminosa, feature inspirational quotes from various authors and philosophers throughout history. When read together, they seem to present the central theme of their respective album, the first representing freedom. Quote, "Man is free at the moment he wishes to be," Voltaire. And the second representing light. Quote, "The light of the sun is but the shadow of love," Henry David Thoreau. Starting with their third album, Free, the quotes were replaced with song lyrics. Truth be told, as much as I like knowing the lyrics so I can sing along, I really do miss those beautiful quotes. With such an air of exalted purity about them, it may be hard to remember that these boys, like those quotes, are human at their core. They consider themselves as an alternative kind of boy band rather than a group of choir boys. For all their divine harmonies and musical fame, they are all still regular boys, and they are proud of that. In fact, sometimes they trade their robes in for white or black hoodies with slacks, or even entirely casual clothing in the case of their music videos. And as I mentioned, their catalog isn't limited only to church hymns and classical pieces. Speaking from personal experience as well as personal opinion, not many songs transition well to the choir style, especially those of fundamentally differing genres like rock or pop. But these kids have the practice of song covering down to a fine art, literally. They add a youthful vigor to the already refreshing Orinoco flow by Enya. They bring harmonious virtue to a new level in their rendition of From a Distance, written by Julie Gold and popularized by Bette Midler. Wayfaring Stranger, a 19th century American folk song sung by such musicians as Johnny Cash and Neil Young, is made all the more poignant and melancholy for being sung by children. And in Celine Dion and Andrea Bocelli's The Prayer, the tear-inducing love and spirituality is flawlessly retained. Historically, choirs have been associated primarily with the church, and in many respects, Libera is no exception. However, they achieve something that few other choirs of this kind have. Their rich, clear vocals and fresh musical approach give strength to words and sounds that emanate from the distant past, in order to create a message of hope and peace that can resonate with those living in today's world. Whether through the caress of a single soft note or two, or the rush of a glorious harmony, even children are more than capable of reaching people's hearts as well as their ears. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.